What up, Facebook Live family and friends? The headed therapist is here, Elliot Andre with Connected Roots. I have an incredible, technically difficult interview with my friend, Jim. So we had some difficulties, people, but we figured it out. We are killing it right now. Living truth. All right, very good. I had to get that out of my system. I just couldn't help myself. How was it for you, Jim?
Hey, Elliot, I think you're very generous when you say we figured it out. I think you figured it out, and I pressed the buttons when you said to press them. So let's just be honest about that.
All right, we're honest. We're good.
All right.
Awesome. Well, Jim, please, if you could, let everybody out there know who you are, what you specialize in, what sets you apart from the field. I think that'd be really cool.
Sure. My name is Jim Macris. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I have a private practice called Care Partners Counseling. And what I do in that practice, I specialize in working with caregivers of older adults, whether that be informal caregivers, which kind of encompasses families, friends, spouses, adult children. They're typically just folks like you and I who have a parent or a loved one, or older folks that have a spouse who needs care. That's what an informal caregiver is. And then there's formal caregivers, which are people that are in the profession of caregiving,
Sure.
Whether that be at a caregiving agency or they are in the helping professions. So anybody involved in the world of caregiving is who I specialize in helping in my therapy practice.
I think, Jim, one thing that we talked about off camera and a couple weeks ago is the essence of how important those people that you work with are in giving them support 100% of the time. And I self-disclosed and shared with you that my dad is somebody who has ALS, and he's going through that with my mom right now. And we're trying to kind of figure out where we should go forward. So how would you encourage somebody who's kind of on the brink or the edge of like finding support to do so? Like what would you do? What would you say? How would you really push them to find that support and work with you?
Well, I think it's important to normalize the situation in that they're not alone. And I don't mean they're not alone, that there's professionals to help, but they're not alone. They're not the only person going through this caregiving situation that can feel so isolating. Many times it can feel like you're the only person doing it, and you have to do it on your own. Caregivers don't often don't even identify themselves as a caregiver. They just like, well, this is my mom, this is what I do, or this is my husband. And it happens gradually sometimes, unless it's a sudden illness or accident. So I think first normalizing, let them know that 80% of all long-term care in this country is provided by unpaid informal caregivers. Wow. That equates to approximately 45 million Americans are caregivers. So and and just letting them know that they're not alone, and that anybody that you speak to that's going through this, or any professional you speak to that's going through this, is going to say, you really can't do this alone. You can do it alone, but only for so long. Right. So one of the problems that I think caregivers or challenges that caregivers face when reaching out for help, which I think is what your question is, how do you get them? How do you present them to reach out for help?
Absolutely.
Is a sense of guilt or time constriction. They're already overwhelmed. If they're a spouse or a loved one, they're giving all their time and energy to caring for the person that they're caring for, and they think, how could I find time or money or resources to devote to myself?
Right.
Or it could be somebody younger who's in this, what we call the sandwich generation, which is raising kids, financially supporting kids, emotionally supporting kids. Maybe they're in college and they're caring for a parent. So how do I now build time to take care of myself? So I guess the easy answer for that for people is, if you don't, you'll only be providing care for the one you love for just so long, and then you'll be the one needing care, because the physical stress, the emotional stress builds up and takes its toll. So I think reframing that from doing something for yourself to, yes, you're doing it for yourself, but ultimately it's so that you can continue on the path that you are dedicated to right now, which is providing the best care possible for your loved one.
Right.
In order to do that, you need to take care of yourself, and that therapy could be a part of that.
Right. So you're not just working with the caregiver; you're working almost in unison with the person who's being cared for, in a sense, and what that looks like, right? I mean, I don't feel like you could work with just one or the other. And you tell me, I'm not so familiar in that regard of what you offer in that sense. If you could let our viewers know what that may look like.
Sure. The main focus is the caregiver to offer support and tools. So, I mean, they're experiencing so many different emotions and experiences of anxiety, stress, depression, grief, so many different things, resentment, anger. It's a whole realm. So to support them so they can do better in caregiving, but also still have joy in life and still have some life. But in cases where the care recipient needs to be involved, wants to be involved, or the partner wants them involved, then we work as a family. We work as a couple. We work as a family.
Okay. I didn't realize you worked with families as well. So thank you for clarifying that. So can you talk more about what that looks like working with the family in terms of navigating the dynamics of the family, or just how you represent yourself in that situation, working with both parts, because it's such a different action for each part of the process.
Right. And it truly is. I mean, when there's an individual caregiver in a session, it's much different than when it's a family. So that we're meeting their needs, we're dealing with their emotions. And I think what's really important in the individual setting is that at the most basic level, which we as therapists may think is the most basic level, but can be so much more of the meaningful level for caregivers, is they have 1 hour a week where the time is dedicated to them in a safe, non-judgmental, compassionate environment, because they spend so much time either being judged by others for the job that they're doing or not doing, or more, and just as often judging themselves terribly hard on themselves, thinking they could be doing better. So to answer your question, how it looks with a family is, for example, I have times where adult children live out of state, and they come in for a visit and want to come in for a session with both of their parents to say, here's my mom, she's caring for my dad, here's my dad, here's what's been going on. And then we have, basically, it's like a family therapy session. It's just, okay, how do you feel about what's happening? What are the care needs? How do you feel receiving care? How are you doing providing care? And now you have this long distance caregiver usually sitting there saying, I see these problems with mom and dad, but what can I do? How do I?
Right.
So we kind of work through that together. And if they're here for longer than that, there's also locals that may be in that same situation. They come, and I'll structure it different, just like in family therapy. There'll be times where I meet with just the adult child. There'll be times where I meet with just the care giver, or as I like to call them, care partners, or the care recipient, or all three together, or any of those pairs.
Yeah, man, I think it's I relate so much to this, being a child of a parent who is going through terminal illness and disease. So I get it. It's like I'm constantly thinking, like, what else can I do in a sense to help out my family and parents? So thumbs up, or if you relate, comment, please, ask for support, because I think this is a main reason why we're doing this. I feel like talking about this right now with you is totally destigmatizing this essence of like the shoulda, coulda, wouldas. I think with a lot of care recipients, I love that term. I think that's way more interesting than like, labeling somebody by their illness and the caregiver. So
with that, Elliot, I think, and that's why I named my practice Care Partners, because really, first of all, let's just use let's use a family system. So the husband and wife, let's say the husband's caring for the wife. They're still partners. She's a caregiver, and it is the accepted term, and I understand that, and I still use it because it's the accepted and most widely used term. But they're still partners, and caregiving kind of gives the connotation that one person's giving, one person's receiving. But both parties are still giving. Both parties are still trying. Both parties still love and doing what they can do at the stage they're at. And then beyond the partnership of that, you as the adult child are a partner. Their doctor is a partner, their physical therapist, their social worker. So it's really, and we really need to create a whole care network to help this process.
I agree with you completely. I think we forget about that sometimes, that it really is this essence of partnership. No matter how it is or where we are or how we're connected, we all affect each other, I think, equally, in the sense of doesn't matter who in that regard. But still, are you there?
I'm back.
Good.
So our technical difficulties continue, but Elliot fixed it once again.
There we go. Good. I think just normalizing it totally is a huge process of that for sure.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know if there's any kind of tips or like knowledge you could pass along to our viewers in a sense of what is most helpful to care recipients and caregivers in that regard, to kind of set boundaries or make sure that people are on the same page, like in just communication and trying to get away from this idea of resentment. I don't know if you've worked with people enough in some settings to know like what really works or what doesn't, but I think people really want tangible ideas from you in the setting of what would be the best way.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And it comes up all the time. I mean, it's part of the process. It's a fantastic question, Elliot. Really, there's two pieces to that, and it all boils down to, in my perspective, it boils down to communication. When communication is possible, and I think communication is possible. I say when possible because if we start to talk about dementia and Alzheimer's, communication changes and the way we communicate changes.
Yes.
But there's still communication. But to answer your question in a concrete fashion, I think communication and how that looks as far as boundaries and providing help while still encouraging and respecting independence and right to self-determination. No? So sometimes we get very concerned about the people we're caring for, so we step in out of love and concern and we take away things that they could be doing for themselves. And with that, we take away a piece of themselves. So I think that there's an opportunity to communicate about this, and it's very simple. It's asking, would you like help with that? Do you need help with that? Would you like me to help you with it? How could I be helpful with that?
And likewise,
and rather than assuming and jumping in. And likewise, I really encourage the other care partner or the care recipient to ask for help. Or to say, no, I really don't need help with this. I've got this. I can put my pants out. I can transfer safely. So I think that's a very basic area of communication, but can really help with boundaries and overstepping boundaries.
Boundaries and empowerment. Wow.
Oh, and absolutely. And we want to keep. We don't want to take away people's independence when they still have it, and it still gives them the value and the meaning. And we have to put all of this with the caveat that if it's a safety issue, we then have to look at things a little bit more different.
Totally.
Yeah, absolutely.
I interrupted you. I wanted you to finish what you were saying.
No, I think I was wrapping it up. That you had a fantastic question that we really want to encourage the communication so that the boundaries are clear.
Yes.
And then also time in family sessions, in couple sessions, we set concrete firm boundaries. So, for instance, a gentleman is refusing to go to the doctor when he's having symptoms, but at the same time, the wife or daughter and son are encouraging them to go to the doctor all the time at the first, sign of anything. So we have to set boundaries and say, okay, you will, talk about when you're feeling symptoms, and it's okay if we call, let's say, starting with your general physician and explain it. And if the nurse gets back and says, no, that doesn't sound serious, then there's no need to come in. But if they do say there's a need to come in, let's go in. And that removes a little bit of the conflict between the care partners. From saying, I'm saying you need to go, and the other one digging in and saying there's no reason why I need to go to the doctor. That's just a small concrete example, but that's how we do some concrete work around it.
But in sense of what that looks like and is, I mean, truly that in itself is so difficult to navigate. Hey, what's up?
We got one more thing going on here.
Love it. I didn't really understand what was happening. I thought you were making no, I'm just kidding.
I was making an extra phone call. We had a few spare moments. I thought I'd make a call.
Right, absolutely. No, I think one thing you're hitting on so much, and what I've experienced in my own experience with work, living and working and being a part of these family dynamics, is that people are so set and stubborn in their ways of when they feel like they need help. And I experienced with my grandfather, a couple of months ago. The dude's like sitting there, looks like he's seizing, and I'm like, "Yo, you need to go to the hospital right now." He's like, "No, I'm fine." I'm like, "No, you need to go to the hospital." So it's like, even in essence of what that looks like right now, like communicating what they want, what they need, and how they express it is so difficult.
Right.
Have you ever been in an experience where you like had to step in and just be like, this is what we're doing, this is how we need to make this happen?
Yeah.
Okay, tell me about it, seriously, because I think a lot of people have experienced similar thing that I just explained, and they just don't know what the hell to do.
Well, I think, you know, giving the example you gave, and I can use some from client situations where I don't want to get specific with client situations.
Well, disclose as much as you feel comfortable disclosing. Absolutely.
But somebody that's come into the office and said, you know, and the care partner has revealed that they're having serious medical symptoms that are concerning to me, or that I have observed a change in speech, or mobility, or cognitive functioning, that I have to say, okay, this is the time where, you know, we all have to talk together seriously about this. I'm concerned. This is why I'm concerned. Have you noticed this? Have you been aware of it? And I think the most important step right now is following up with your physician. And I've had times where people have left my office and drove directly to their general physician.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
When it's that serious, and they did follow up and then find out, okay, we need to do some testing, and we go from there. And
you were there to make that call, dude. I mean, like, we need more people like you. Like, seriously.
Well, that's certainly not my primary function. But while we're in the office, and it comes up, we need to be aware of it. And I think that's part of being a good therapist, or being, and maybe it's my roots in social work, where social workers really can work in so many different arenas and provide resources and do therapy and provide concrete help. I think with those roots, I look at our relationship in, like I said earlier, creating a care partnership with as many people as we can to support everybody. So if that's a concrete intervention, like right now we need to do this, and that's what we do. If we have the time to, and we want to employ the care partners in the process. So coaching them around, how do you get your siblings involved? How do you get your neighbors involved? What about the UPS man that shows up with your, you know, online shopping once a day? You know, you make friends with him and get his phone number. He may let you know, or just give him your phone number and say, hey, you know, there's a package on your mom's doorstep, and it's been there a couple of days, and usually she picks it up every day. Right. So we want to kind of build that, and likewise, going back to what I was saying, we here in Boulder County, we have an amazing resources. The county area agency on aging has so many resources and so many services. The Alzheimer's Society offers support groups throughout the community, also, which I volunteer with, and I do presentations, workshops. I also run, or facilitate, I should say, a caregiver group for male caregivers. But so it's also my responsibility to refer people that I'm working with. Well, I know my focus is to work with them therapeutically, but they also need all these other resources that are available to them. And again, that's part of creating a full package of care.
Totally. I think that holistic approach really long-term just seems so much more safe, secure, and comfortable. Just thinking about my own situation.
Right.
I wasn't even thinking about what you're describing, like you just mentioned that, in the sense of like what that looks like, right? Right. Like mom's gone and like dad's alone, and like he fought like I mean, to even think about like on the UPS, like, dude, that's genius. Like, right? I mean, I just think that's such a tangible, you know, tool and tip to let people know like that's available. Seriously though. I mean, like, what's it been like in regards to facilitating these groups for you? Because I think a lot of people don't know about these groups in sense of caregiving groups. So what is it like? How do you work it? Do people need to sign up? Do they show up? Like, what does that look like for people in that realm?
Sure. So this is with the Alzheimer's Society, and it's run by the Alzheimer's Society. Yeah. I volunteer with that, but there's groups that are located all over the Boulder County region and other regions. I'm just in the Boulder County region, referred to, and they're usually held at senior centers, sometimes, you know, community centers, different locations throughout the county.
Does it feel like psycho ed? Is it like that, or is it more so like validation and?
No, it's much more about the core value of a support group. I think is bringing people together that are in the same life experience. So folks, like for my men's group, these are men who are suddenly caring for their women, who in this generation of that age, that still is a big switch.
Right, because it's the opposite. Because women typically live longer.
Yeah,
than
and
men,
that
right?
has
been. Yeah.
And with this age group, I mean, it's changing as boomers age, but with this age group, we still see a lot of traditional family roles where even if both parties worked, a lot of the domestic and household stuff still fell on women, which to bring up a small point, which isn't that small, is cooking. And when the women begin to stop cooking, or the men, and believe me, I have men that are in that boat too, that have done the cooking and
like
no longer can. And I do the cooking as well, so I completely understand. Yes, so we'll be there one day. But but it's a big deal. No matter whether you're a man or a woman, if the other partner who's always provided that has done it, and suddenly they can't or won't, and you don't know how to boil water. This is big. So in the group setting, it's an opportunity for other men, women, caregivers, whatever the case, whatever the group is, to say, hey, we're in a similar life experience here. Absolutely. And it's just really validating to hear other folks going through the same thing you are. And then in a group like that that's open to any stage. In other words, you could be somebody coming to the group who just found out your partner has mild cognitive impairment, and somebody else could be in the group that has late-stage Alzheimer's. There's also a lot of inner education among group members.
Good.
Yep. So they're offering resources, support, tools that work for them. Yeah. So, and in every situation is individual, and every person is individual. So it's kind of this has worked for me. Why don't you try it? They tried it. It worked, or it didn't work, and we go through it again.
I'd be curious to know if you could dive into more. I think a lot of our viewers out there are curious about maybe this thought you said about role reversal, like what that may look like. Because my mother's experienced it. My dad didn't do cook, he didn't do nothing. So like for her to like have to take care of him and then not be in a place where she feels like she can like make a real dinner in some regards, like talk about that idea of role reversal and like how that affects people. Because I think we might take that for granted in some regards as we do age.
Yeah, and I think it's something that we don't, as outsiders trying to support our friends and families, we don't really tune into that as much. And I think what happens is it could be anything from paying the bills to who gets the newspaper, to who drives, to who cooks, to who cleans the house, and or who works, and suddenly somebody can't work. So I think what I see mostly in that is fear. It creates a lot of fear and anxiety because suddenly the care partner is faced with roles and tasks that they know very little about and have relied on their partner. And it's two-way. The female relies on the male relies on the female for whatever those roles look like. But suddenly those roles are now on the person who hasn't been familiar with them. And it creates anxiety. And first of all, I now have to add this to my list. I'm already overwhelmed. And I have to now understand it. How do I figure out this online banking? Where is the password?
Yeah, man. It's so much shit we take for granted. Like, it's crazy. Like, how do we prep and plan for that? Like, seriously.
That's a great question. I'm so glad you asked that question. I'm a big fan. And when I get clients early enough, and when I do trainings and workshops, I recommend this. When we're talking about family dynamics and caregiving, this always comes up. And it's like a corporation or a well-run business, cross-training. While you're both healthy or in the early stages of health fading, cross-train each other. And what that looks like is, I'm going to sit down and pay the bills right now. Sit down with me and let me show you my system and what works for me. And we pay these bills on the 1st, we pay these bills on the 15th. Here's how we do the checkbook, or here's how we do online. And here's a list of passwords. Likewise, I'm going to cook breakfast this morning. Come stand with me while I make the eggs and the potatoes and the toast, and start to cross-train each other while you're healthy. And not only does that give you preparation for when this time comes, if the time comes, but it also gives you a new way to connect with your partner.
Absolutely.
Or
man.
with your parent.
I love that. I think that's to be able to teach somebody, I think, in my experience, is such like a humbling, beautiful experience. And to pass that on to somebody, who you never thought you would have to do that with,
Right.
right?
Right.
You know, our brain. I think our brains are very much more like reactive when it comes to something in certain regards, rather than proactive and planning.
Sure. Sure.
But I love this idea of cross training. Talk about it more. Like what does it look like? If you could disclose, like in a sense, for a couple of clients that you've had, maybe just to get tangibles.
Yeah, I'll give you a real experience where it was a little bit later than cross training, but it comes back to the meaning of what took place.
Sure.
And this was a gentleman who did not know how to cook, and his wife did the cooking, and with some cognitive decline, has decided not to cook.
Right.
And we had talked a lot about that, and we talked about maybe him working with her, or trying, because it was at MCI, very early stages, so starting to learn. So he came back one day and said how his adult daughter, had come over and taught him how to make soup. So they made, I don't know if it was chicken soup or vegetable soup, I can't remember. Right. But he was talking about it, and one of the things that caregivers often do, and we need to work on, as I mentioned earlier, is that self-critic and the negative self-talk.
Yes,
so totally. He immediately, I said, well, how was that for you? He immediately went into, well, it wasn't as good as my wife's.
Sure.
And I said, but how was it? And he said, it was great.
I love that.
Right. So what you got? But how really was it? It was great. And then he said, but you know what I enjoyed even more than that? The time I spent with my daughter.
That's unreal, man. Come on.
So, it's that, and that's what I give that example of. There he learned how to do something that he can now provide, but he also had a special new way to connect.
That's amazing.
And we're connecting with his daughter. So, yeah.
That's so cool. It reminds me of some of the experiences I've had with working with the elderly population and recreational therapy as well. This essence of like providing an activity for somebody to do to connect them with themselves and others in their unit. So I know exactly what that feeling's like. I've done it myself. My grandmother had back surgery, major back surgery a couple years ago, and I went and played cards with her, and that to her was like the greatest thing ever. She's like, you would come and play cards with me? Like this essence of, like, that's amazing. Yeah. So I really appreciate that example. That's so cool.
Yeah, that's a super great point you just brought up too. There's so many little things that we overlook, and I think long distance caregivers can really fall into this trap, because when we travel home, or when we travel to where our loved ones are living, we have a limited amount of time. We now have taking time off from work, taking time, it costs money for airfare. You only have a certain amount of time, and you've already prioritized as a caregiver what you need to get done while you're there. There's so many things we need to take care of, and we rush around and do as much as we can, and we get all those tasks completed, and we forgot to sit down and hold their hand. Right. We forgot to sit down and play cards. We forgot to sit down and have a nice meal together. And while all the tasks that you performed were important, they may not have been as important as spending time, and that meaningful time, whether it be a 10 minutes, half hour, or half a day. Yeah,
just that quality time, I think, for a lot of people. So in my experience from being a caretaker from afar is so necessary.
Right.
And I think the nice thing about my situation as well is that it's like not expected, but it's always welcomed.
Yep.
And I think that helps me prioritize those other smaller moments when hanging out with my dad or my grandparents, because I've already told them I've set boundaries in a sense, like you're saying, like I can't do everything. Like I can't spend hours and hours with you. I have other priorities as well in my life. So I think communicating and setting boundaries in that way in myself has been really helpful for sure. No doubt.
Yeah, and I think with that too, Elliot, you brought up another really good point. And I think it's because you have personal experience with caregiving, and I have seen it through my life. One of the things that we fall into is this sense of obligation.
Yes.
And we're obligated. I'm the wife, I'm the husband, I'm the son, I'm the daughter. I'm obligated to do, and we usually make our list A through Z, right? Right. So I'm obligated for all. I am
A through Z plus. Yeah.
But what I talk to folks about is we need a healthy balance, and because you're in the caregiving situation, so often we now see our world as one obligation. But I often talk to people about ranking, or at least listing, what are your other obligations? Are you a husband? Are you a father? Are you a boyfriend? Are you you're a son or a daughter? And what about your core values? Who are you? And that really is your primary obligation to who you are as a person. And I don't mean that in a trite way, but you really have to
No.
think about what are your values and what does life mean to you, and that's your core obligation, and work your way out from there. And oftentimes we find that we're operating as a caregiver like that's our only obligation, our primary obligation,
Right.
but we may be ignoring or even hurting our other obligations, and we need to find a more healthy balance.
Yeah, well, it almost to me at some points felt like my lack of sense of self in some ways.
Sure.
I feel like I had put so much energy and time and effort into that it didn't feel like I was at a place where I was like I didn't even know what the hell I was doing. I was like, I'm just like showing up. I feel like an empty shell to the point where it was like, okay, now I need to really figure out like how I can communicate what I need as well in the situation, rather than feeling like you're saying obligated, because it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good to have that, in my opinion, the idea of obligation, because it takes away I don't know if it's excitement about it, but just like the
joy.
The joy, yes, thank you. The joy of like what that looks like of spending time or being a caregiver. So,
right, and that's also what leads to and it's inevitable. And especially people that are caring full time, that are doing it on their own, or full time caregivers. That feeling of resentment, of putting my life on hold to do this. Yes. But what complicates it is I call it the caregivers or care partners' best and worst friend. Let's just say permanent companion, guilt.
Yes.
So care partners are so good at guilt that they can be feeling resentful. Well, first they feel guilty for not doing enough.
Right.
At the same time, they're feeling resentful for having so much to do and putting their life on hold.
Yes.
And then they feel guilty for feeling resentful.
Right. Vicious cycle, man.
Terrible.
Yeah.
And there's really no place for guilt in this, because caregivers and care partners, they're doing the best they can on any given day. And some days they're going to be performing better, or in their minds better than they did the day before. And some days are going to be a little bit worse. But I really believe you're doing the best you can on that day with the sleep, the nutrition, the skills that you had on that day. And it doesn't mean it'll be how you were tomorrow or how you were yesterday, but we have to stop judging ourselves as caregivers and understand that you're really doing the best you can.
Right. And I think that's one thing. Give me 1 second. I'm going to grab my charger here.
Sure.
In regards to this idea of judgment and what that really looks like, because it is vicious, man. And I think a lot of people experience that regularly, like what judgment feels like and your guilt. And it's such a hard thing to kick, because it's almost ingrained in us that we need to feel that way in certain situations, especially when it has to do with family or people that we love and care for. That assumption of what and how they show up for us.
And totally. It's, oftentimes it comes with caregiving as a big part of that, but oftentimes, and as you know, in any therapy, the issue that somebody comes in with isn't the only thing that we talk about. Because everything's connected. So especially caregiving in families, you have all the family dynamics of a lifelong history, which could have been rooted in guilt, or it could have been rooted in abuse, or it could have been rooted in a beautiful relationship.
Right.
But regardless, you're still caring for that person. And how do you not only survive that, but live through it and find small moments of joy? And how do we stop that judgment and that self-criticism? And we do that with self-compassion, and learn how to be more compassionate to ourselves. And also, I think a big part of it, and what seems to be very helpful for clients, is learning a little bit about mindfulness.
Absolutely.
Because as a caregiver, we really spend a lot of time in the past or the future. So we're constantly saying, I should have done this different. If I had picked a different doctor, if we'd gone to a different hospital, then this would have happened. Or what happens next when he can't do this anymore? When this happens, I will then do this, and then it'll mean this. And those are just stories we tell ourselves, because we don't know. We don't know. There's no, and a lot of it is just kind of cognitively challenging that really you're telling yourself that if you made these 3 choices, then this would have happened. There's no reality to that. It's just a story.
Absolutely.
Just like we walk ourselves all the way down from start to finish with a thought. And it's really, in the future, we have no idea what that holds. So bringing people back to the moment. And that's not only does it help with stress management and anxiety and fears and depression, but in the caregiving situation, it also allows you to find those small moments of joy. If you're in a difficult caregiving, or you're in a positive caregiving, there are these moments of joy that can be found. But if you're not present, you won't be there for them. You'll miss that. Yeah.
I think that's a great point. I'm just thinking about how much and how important mindfulness really is to staying present in the moment and just living that those places and those joyful times and appreciating them rather than, like you're saying, living in the past or the future.
Sure.
I think that's an awesome way to really think and believe in that, because I know I can take that for granted sometimes too, in the sense of where I'm at. So
yeah, well, we all do.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, look how busy we all are and how connected we all are to technology and the news, absolutely. And how our whole societal level of anxiety has risen over the years. And then take that and add in being a caregiver while you work a job, while you care for family, and you feel completely overwhelmed, and you have to be thinking about everything at once. And our minds are already so busy, and we're already having thousands and thousands of thoughts a minute. How do we focus back? How do we come to the present?
Absolutely, I think that's great.
Yeah,
I love that. Jim, amazing, man. Thank you so much for your knowledge, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today, man. This hits home for me, and you know, and it really is helpful, I think, in my own sense of the interview to really take some of these thoughts and ideas home to my own family. So truly appreciate that. And before we wrap up, is there any way that we can reach you? Any information you'd like to share with our community and friends and family out there?
Sure.
Your phone number, your email, website, and some resources. I'd really appreciate that.
Well, first, thank you, Elliot, for having me and for taking an interest in my practice, but more importantly, taking an interest in the population that I serve.
Totally.
So it's really respectable of you to do that. I appreciate that. As far as reaching me, I have a website, carepartnerscounseling.com, or you can email me at jim@carepartnerscounseling.com.
Awesome.
I'll certainly respond. And if you want to go to the website, there's lots of information there about caregiving, also about me, and you can start to learn a little bit about it.
Very good. Well, appreciate everybody for viewing today. Amazing interview. Peace up, head therapist out. Jim, you want to just push the stop?
I got it.
I'm all over it.
Thank you very much, Ellie. We'll talk soon.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
Bye.